Imagine waking before dawn in a city that smells like a wound. The straw beneath you is alive with movement. Fleas, mostly, fat and slow from the night's feeding, but also lice that have nested so deeply into the seams of your single linen shirt that no amount of scratching finds them. The air inside your dwelling is thick with tallow smoke, animal breath, and something older, something that clings to the timbers and the earthen floor and the bodies of the 5 other people you share this single room with. A smell that no modern person has ever had to name because they have never had to live inside it. You have no word for hygiene as a concept. What you have is a bucket, a rag, and the knowledge, handed down not by doctors, who barely exist in your world, but by neighbors and grandmothers, that washing your face in the morning is fine, but submerging your body in hot water is almost certainly an invitation for disease. This is the year 1348, and what is about to arrive in your city is going to make every foul, intimate detail of your daily life feel quaint by comparison. The average person living in a 14th century European city did not think of their life as filthy. They had rituals, routines, a system for managing the body's demands that was as coherent and internally logical as anything we practice today. It was simply built on entirely different premises that we now understand were catastrophically wrong. They believed that the body's natural smell was protective. They believed that bathing opened the skin's pores and allowed pestilence to enter. They believed that linen, pressed close against the skin and changed as often as one could afford to change it, was the primary technology of cleanliness. These were not ignorant people in the modern sense. They were people reasoning carefully from incomplete information, and the incompleteness of that information would cost millions of lives. The streets they walked were channels of perpetual filth. Slop buckets emptied each morning from upper windows, blood and offal from the butcher's stall 3 doors down, tanning runoff from leather workers whose acids turned waterways undrinkable, and the corpses of animals that lay where they fell until someone with a cart collected them, which in busy neighborhoods could take several days. The city was not dirty by intention. It was dirty by the sheer pressure of human density and the complete absence of infrastructure designed to separate waste from living space. And moving through all of this, every day, were the merchants and monks and children and beggars, carrying it on the soles of their shoes back into their homes, their markets, their churches, building a world in which the boundary between the living and the dead, between the clean and the contaminated, had no physical expression at all. The toilet, as we understand it, did not exist. What existed instead was a spectrum of solutions shaped entirely by class and geography. At the top of the social order, the wealthy could afford a garderobe, a small stone closet cantilevered out from the castle wall, with a hole in a wooden seat through which waste dropped into the moat below. The name meant wardrobe, and the room served both functions simultaneously, because the ammonia from human waste was believed to repel moths and protect the fine woolen clothes hung inside. At the bottom of the social ladder, which is to say, for the overwhelming majority of people, there was the privy pit, the communal midden heap at the edge of the settlement, or simply the nearest dark corner of the alley where convention had established that such things were done. What there was not, in any kitchen or bedroom or merchant's hall in Europe in 1348, was a room dedicated to the private management of the body's most intimate functions. Privacy, in the modern sense, was a luxury so extreme as to be almost inconceivable. Water was the central paradox of medieval life. Clean, drinkable, uncontaminated water was something that medieval people understood, at a purely practical level, was not guaranteed. They had no germ theory, but they had centuries of empirical observation telling them that drinking from certain wells made people sick, that rivers downstream of slaughterhouses were dangerous, that milk left in the summer heat killed children. Their response was ale. Weak ale, small beer brewed to a low alcohol content, was the default hydration technology of the medieval world, drunk throughout the day by adults and children alike. The fermentation process killed most of the pathogens that would have made raw water lethal. This is the part historians don't teach in school, that for centuries, the primary reason European children survived infancy in urban environments was not medicine, not prayer, and not royal decree. It was beer. The city ran on it, quietly and without commentary, a solution so integrated into daily life that no one thought to remark on it, which is exactly the kind of detail that disappears from the official record and survives only in the ledgers of breweries and the complaints of water sellers driven out of business. Medieval people did wash, but the washing was nothing like what we practice. They washed their hands before meals, because table manners in polite society were elaborate and hand-washing was a central ritual of hospitality. They washed their faces in the morning, in a basin of cold water fetched from the well. They changed their linen, their shirts, their undershirts, and the frequency of that changing was one of the most reliable indicators of wealth in the entire medieval world. A wealthy merchant might change his linen shirt once a week. A laborer might own a single shirt and wear it for months without removing it, sleeping in it, working in it, sweating into it, until the fabric itself was as grey and inhabited as the straw he slept on. The body's outer layers, the thick wool doublets, the leather boots, the heavy cloaks, were virtually never washed. They were beaten, brushed, aired, and spot-treated with urine, which was the primary cleaning agent of the medieval world, its ammonia content making it genuinely effective at breaking down stains. That detail stops people. But here is what makes it so deeply unsettling when you hold it against the year 1348. The flea that carried Yersinia pestis needed no invitation. It was already there, in the straw, in the grain stores, in the fur of the cats and dogs that shared people's homes, waiting for a host weakened enough that the bacterium it carried could do its worst. What changed in 1348 was not the infrastructure of European life, which had been this way for generations. What changed was the arrival, along the trade routes from Central Asia, of a strain of plague so virulent that when it met a body weakened by chronic malnutrition, polluted water, and a lifetime of close contact with disease vectors, it killed with a speed that had no precedent in recorded European memory. The buboes, those agonizing swellings in the armpit and groin and neck, appeared within days. Death followed in hours after that. And no amount of spice, no amount of ale, no amount of carefully changed linen made the slightest difference to the outcome. But no one was prepared for what came next. Specifically, for the way the plague did not simply kill people, but dismantled the entire social architecture that had made medieval life function at all. Servants fled the homes of the dying. Priests refused last rites. The Florentine chronicler Boccaccio described neighbors who would not look at neighbors, and bodies lying in the streets for days because no one would touch them. The intimacy that had been the defining condition of medieval life, the shared beds, the communal meals, the bodies pressed together in small warm rooms, became the mechanism of transmission. Everything that had made the medieval world livable was also what made it lethal. The physicians had no idea what they were fighting. Medieval medicine operated within a framework inherited from the ancient Greeks, specifically from the Galenic tradition, which understood health and disease as a matter of balance among four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A physician confronted with a patient presenting with blackened swellings and fever would attempt to rebalance the humours, through bloodletting, through purging, through herbal poultices chosen for their believed humoral properties. Bloodletting was catastrophic for plague patients, who were already dying from septicemia. The treatments medieval medicine had to offer were not merely useless but actively lethal, and the practitioners who administered them had no way of knowing this. They were doing their best within a system that was internally consistent and based on the best available ancient authority. The authority was simply wrong. What they reached for instead was theology. The scale of the dying. In some cities, 30 to 60% of the population dead within months, could only be understood as divine punishment. The flagellant movement emerged in this period. Bands of men who travelled from town to town publicly whipping themselves with iron-tipped scourges in an act of collective penance, trying to outsuffer the punishment, to demonstrate to God that the debt had been paid in blood. And then the unthinkable happened. The scapegoating. Jewish communities across Europe were accused, without evidence, of poisoning the wells, and massacred in pogroms that swept from the Rhine Valley to Poland. The accusation made no sense even by medieval reasoning. Jewish people were dying of plague too, in proportional numbers. But sense was not what terrified survivors were searching for. They were searching for a cause they could act on, a source of contamination they could remove. The impulse to find something to blame was more powerful than evidence, and the thin membrane of tolerance that had allowed Jewish communities to exist within Christian Europe was not strong enough to survive it. The survivors emerged into a world structurally altered in ways that took generations to understand. Land was abundant and labor was scarce, a reversal so total that it upended the economic foundations of feudalism. Serfs who had been bound to the land for generations found their labor suddenly valuable, lords competing for workers. The entire calculus of power shifted beneath their feet while they were still burying their dead. The plague killed indiscriminately. Peasants and kings, nuns and prostitutes, the devout and the apostate, and in that democratic violence it accidentally created the conditions for a social transformation that the survivors were too grief-stricken to fully perceive while it was happening. But the transformation came. And what came with it, slowly and imperfectly, was the beginning of something that would eventually become public health. The first quarantine protocols in European history, established in the port cities of Ragusa and Venice in the 1370s, not because anyone understood how plague spread, but because someone had observed that sailors arriving from infected ports seemed to bring the plague with them, and that isolating those sailors for 40 days reduced the frequency of outbreaks. Quarantino, 40 days, gave us the word quarantine. It was not science in the modern sense, but it was observation, and observation, carefully conducted and faithfully recorded, is how science begins. You are listening to this because enough of them made it. Because enough of the survivors crawled out from under the weight of the 14th century and rebuilt, imperfectly, on the ruins of what had been lost. The conditions of medieval life, the crowding, the contaminated water, the malnutrition, the shared beds alive with fleas, did not cause the Black Death. But they created a population perfectly positioned to receive it at its worst. And out of that receiving, out of that catastrophic, generation-defining encounter with a disease they could not name and could not cure, came the slow, death-bought accumulation of knowledge that eventually made the modern world possible. Every glass of clean water you drink, every antibiotic you fill without thinking, these are the distant inheritance of 1348. The people who lived through it could not have imagined you. But in a very real sense, you exist because they did not give up. And that is not a comfortable thought, precisely. But it is an honest one. And it is the kind of honesty that the dead deserve from us, even now, even this far from the plague years that made us. If this history has settled into your chest in a way that is hard to shake, subscribe to the Lost Scroll and share this with someone who thinks history is something that happened to other people. Because history is not something that happened to other people. History is the long record of everything that was done and endured and survived so that you could be here to hear it. Ring the bell. We are just getting started.